What is going on YouTube? Welcome to another video in my tutorial series for Java. And today we are going to be talking about exceptions. And what an exception is basically an unintended input, an expected input that is going to fail your program or cause it to crash. Now, what do I mean by that? So, think of the following scenario. We have the following. First of all, let's create a scanner. And I'm going to call mine input right here. I'm going to take an input from the keyboard. Sorry about that. Ugh. Now, the next thing I want to do is perhaps prompt the user for an integer. So, please feed me an integer. Rar, right? Alright, so the next thing we want to do is assign this input that the user is going to provide us to an int variable. So perhaps I'll call it, you know what? I'll call it user input, and I'll set it to the value of input dot next int, which basically next int, which basically states grab whatever the user types in. We're gonna assume it's an input and assign it to this int variable right here. Now that works wonderfully until we decide to give it essentially a value that is not an integer. You're gonna see why in just a second. And let's see, user input. All right, and to make this more realistic, I'm going to essentially do the following. While, you know what, I'm gonna put in a do while loop. And if you guys don't know what a do while loop is, I suggest you take a look at my earlier videos. I do have a tutorial on this. And I'm gonna say the following. So I'm gonna create a Boolean variable. Boolean, perhaps, we're gonna keep running the program. Essentially, we're gonna keep running the program. Um, and never stop it. All right. So boolean true, and you know what? All we have to do is do this while true. Okay. This basically means it's gonna run the program forever. It's never gonna stop because this condition is never gonna be set to false because nowhere in our program did we set this program to false. All right. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm gonna run the program right here, and let's see what happens. So if we give it an integer 1, everything is good. Another integer, good. Now, what if we give it a unrecognizable value, like a string? So, haha. Whoa, would you look at that? We get this error right here that says input mismatch exception. Now, how are we going to handle this? That is where our exception handling comes in. Basically, when we don't want, we expect. Because remember, this is an error that we expect. We know the user because for whatever reason decides, hey, you know what, even though we told him to only input an integer, he decides to input a string. However, we expect such stupidity to happen, so we have created a system of try exception handling, try catch blocks. And essentially what it does is the following. We will wrap this in a try block, and we're going to end it with a catch. And if we take a look at this, our try block right here essentially does the following. We will always put the values or the line of code that we know has potential to crash, right? Because like in this case, this line basically crashed our program right here because the user decided to put in a string value instead of an integer value, right? And our program essentially says, hey, I have no idea how to parse this, I'm going to crash. Okay? Now that we know that there is a potential for these kinds of input, we can gracefully handle it with the following. So what I wanted to do is this. Copy the input mismatch exception, paste it in the catch block right here, and perhaps call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it E. Also, another thing to note, if you see this red bar right here, all it means is you didn't import this exception, and to get rid of that, all you gotta do is import it by clicking Alt or Option Enter, and we gotta get the red bar right there. There we go. That can be a little annoying at first, but trust me, it's a convenient thing to do. Another thing, if you're like me and you've ran into a lot of problems with that, you the next thing you can do is just copy this entire thing right here, Java util dot exception whatnot, and manually import it. All right, so just manually import it if you run into any problems and whatnot. Now, on to the main topic. The try block basically, essentially tries the statements or lines of code that you say have a potential to crash. And when it crashes, how do you want to handle it? And we handle that crash within our catch block right here. So for now, all we're gonna do is perhaps um, print out the following. Sorry, only integers, bud. Read. All right, let's run the program again and see what happens. Take a look here. Feed it 1, nothing happens. I mean, not everything's fine and dandy, but when we feed it the value of k, oh, look at what we have here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this program. And this, I'm actually glad this error happened. Well, it's not an error, but I'm actually glad this happened. And you see, it essentially gets stuck in this loop. So what's happening here? Well, this is a problem with strings in general and buffering. So instead of going into too much details, because I really don't want to do that in a video meant for exceptions, I'm just going to tell you how to fix this. And the way you fix that is with our scanner object, we'll type input and just type in input.next. And we'll run this again. And we'll do the exact same thing, and you'll see that nothing happens this time. Okay? Now, I want to walk you through what happened. Alright, so in this try catch block, in the first input we gave it a value of 1, right? And it assigned the user input to the value of 1, and it proceeded to print out this second statement right here. And because in our entire try block, none of the errors, or rather, there were no exceptions, so we had no need to enter this catch clause. So nothing here was printed essentially. All right, so let's take a look at this, and that is what our output has. Right, there's nothing from the exception or the catch block right here that is printed. Now let's take a look at the next line right here when we pass in an invalid value of ha. Let's take a look. When we pass in a value of ha, it comes in here, and this line essentially crashes, and because of the catch block, we handle it here. And notice another thing, we skip this line right here. Okay, you notice output wasn't printed. Okay, and that is the power of the catch statement. Essentially, it knows that this statement usually requires this statement to be true or not crashing. And because it crashed, we are gonna essentially void this statement and go straight to our catch block. Now, one last thing before I let you guys go is I want to talk about the finally clause. And what is the finally block right here? The finally block basically is a block of code that executes regardless of whether the try catch block passes or fails. Now, what do I mean by that? Um, let's take a look here. From finally clause. All right, let's go ahead and print that. I'm pretty sure you'll get it right away once I run this program, because you'll notice one thing. When I give it a valid input, our from finally clause gets printed out. Now if I give it an invalid input, again, from finally clause gets printed out. So essentially what I'm trying to say is the finally clause is a block of code that gets run regardless of whether you want it to or not. All right? And it runs at the end of these statements right here. Now, that is all I have to say for exceptions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.